Well, here we are, 101st episode, and I'm Bill Correll. Our podcast is Lighting the Candle, a world that works, and I'm so pleased to be here with my buddyette, Jan Jeremias. And I just want to mention to you that Jan is also going to have a podcast coming up here, which is called Pet Life and Longevity with Jan and Tonka. And we will move right into lighting the candle. And to remind you, we do this pretty much every week. And the reason that we do is we're kind of interested in, well, empowerment. We're for people. And as a result of that, we love to have conversations with each other that we feel empowered by. And our intention is that you will also, by your participation, feel empowered. So, with that in mind, Jan, is there any particular subject that you'd like to discuss today, or do you want me to get the random subject generator moving?
Let's get the random subject
Okay.
generator going.
All right. So, how about we talk about and distinguish, let's say, the difference between learning and experience? How does that sound to you?
Oh, great. Love that.
Okay. So, typically we will start. I'm going to have to open or we'll just worry about the definitions another time, and I'm good with that. But what would you say that learning means to you, Jen?
I think of learning as being, if we compare it to, experiencing, you know, I think of learning as much more being book knowledge.
Yep.
So, school, book knowledge, and it's not necessarily what we might label as useless or useful facts, but much more just, let's say, raw knowledge, that you might learn from a book. That's what I think of off the top of my head.
Sure, it's kind of fact based or some new process or technique or skill that can be imparted by reading and perhaps practicing or doing exercises that allow you to internalize what the concepts are in something. And I would say also that learning has to do with creating this new domain of skill that you may not have had before you started the learning process.
Okay, I would agree with that. I think experiencing though, and like, as far as training, because I think of yoga, for example, as being a very experiential experience. I think that it was like you can look at a pose, you can even envision what it would be like to be in the pose,
Yeah.
or, it's like talking about meditation versus actually meditating, you know?
Yes. Yeah. So you could learn how to meditate, and that might be the learning process, and then experience meditation by putting it into action and practicing.
Exactly. And there are some other things that, so that's where experience is interesting because that's much more, it's like, there's so many different avenues where that comes into effect. It's like, reading a recipe or even going to some sort of cooking class, but never actually doing it yourself.
Yes.
Because then the experience becomes multisensory.
Yeah.
You have the, let's say it's cooking, you have the experience of tasting it, of feeling what it's like. And I think that that sensory information is very powerful.
Sure. Sure. And I would completely agree with you that learning may have one or two senses. And as a matter of fact, one of the working definitions that I use is that learning occurs when there are multiple senses that are engaged. And so, for instance, like in a classroom, one of the main reasons that people take notes is that they're using, their hearing and their sight, and they're also, using their sensory experience with their hands, and all of those things together give them this experience of having done something that now is part of them. And that's, I guess, the key part about learning things is to internalize something that you didn't know before in such a way that if you were asked to stand and deliver, toe the mark, and tell me what the answer to this question is, that you could work through that process using your learning. And mostly it came through an experiential process. You like that? I made that up on the spot.
Let's call Merriam-Webster.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah, I do like that. I think that, and I part of the reason I like that is because people learn differently, and we know that. Like some people are much more visual learners, some people are auditory learners. That can listen to a lecture, can listen to a podcast. Some people need to see it in front of them, so they like to see slides or something visual, diagrams, pictures, or photographs, which and then so I think there's definitely a role for each, but some people you definitely will say, "Oh, I'm a visual learner," or I'm metro. I don't need visual stuff. I can just listen to something and I'll get the information.
Yeah. Yeah. The interesting part of that is that I don't, I wouldn't classify myself as either one of those two things. I watch to get the experience and the feeling and the flavor. And later on, if somebody asks me a question that I remember some of the content for, there's no way I could ever give credit to where it came from. It's just some of the stuff sticks and some of the stuff doesn't.
Mhm. No, I think so, especially in this age of technology, where I feel
Yeah,
like we get information from so many different places. A lot of times you can't necessarily pinpoint where you heard it from or where you read it.
yeah,
It's just you just and in general, I think we absorb what we absorb and it goes in so quickly. Sometimes we're like, where did I read that? Or who said that? Sometimes we can recall that and sometimes we can't.
yeah. The joy of life for me is being in a conversation like this, and that actually is you know something that is very special to me. And when if you think about when you have the opportunity to say something with another person, it's a lot different than just recalling something from memory. Or even, I don't know, there are people that can talk for hours with nobody else there. I would much rather play a game of verbal volleyball or ping pong with concepts, and do it, in a partnership. And so not only is it distinguishing something in the conversation, but it's also an opportunity to again experience and learn in this moment.
I think the gift of having a conversation is sometimes your thoughts and ideas become much more, I don't know, I want to say infiltrated into your body or just like, or much more individualized. Like you kind of, your whole belief system is like what you actually believe, or yeah, as you've taken in from that knowledge becomes much more clear. Where if you only read something or there's no conversation, unless you're, like you said, having a conversation with yourself all the time, then sometimes it's not as clear as when you're in conversation with someone else. And in that
Mhm.
way, sometimes that, especially when you hold different viewpoints and stuff, a lot of the time, what ends up happening is you get more, um, what you believe or what you think becomes based on learning becomes much more clear to
Yeah,
you as an
yeah,
individual. You know, you
yeah,
become much more aware of that.
yeah. Say some more.
Just like as I'm thinking about being in conversation with people about different issues or different topics, and how all of a sudden what you've learned and what you believe and everything comes into play. And that can happen also when you're in agreement with people like us on this podcast. I mean, let's say really working toward empowerment. So maybe we don't agree on, you know, everything or whatever, but there is this common kind of theme and thread. And then the exchange between parties or people be sort of endorses and kind of gives more power
Yes.
to what the result.
So what I think is interesting, you presence the notion of belief, and for me, um, I kind of look at belief as we all have them, you know. And what's really cool is you kind of have to be in a conversation to reveal and unconceal a belief you didn't know you had, you know. And then when something comes out like that's the truth or that's how things are, that's just how it is. Um, and then there's this the opportunity for somebody else to say, well, I can see how you would experience it that way, but I experience it this way. And now there's an opportunity to either open your mind up and consider that what you had was just something that might have, just landed there through conversations with other people or how you grew up or where you were and all those sort of things that you really didn't do the work, to dig deeply into it to understand it and then adopt it. No, it just more or less was like a virus that got into your thinking, and here it is. And so I love it when I hear people say things, and then I repeat it back to them, and they don't really realize that they even just said what they said. And it's like, what? and and the notion of a belief in my like a working vocabulary definition of belief for me is something that you hold true that in spite of evidence to the contrary, you refuse to update or let go of. How does that sound?
Mhm. But I think what's interesting about what you said is it's the combination of learning and experience.
Yes.
And, so here we are at belief. And I think that we learn or we're given a lot of information, throughout, like from the time we're born, basically, we're taking in information. And then we experience what we experience, let's say personally, like through our actions, but also what we experience in our setting, like our environment, and all that plays a role, and that forms our beliefs, whether they're real for us a lot of the time,
Yes.
but not, and that's where it becomes individualized.
Yes. And the neat part of it is the whole notion of unconcealing something that's part of you that you now can make a decision to either stand apart from, examine whether or not it actually works in your life, or go and get more information to more fully and richly understand and really kind of flesh out what it is, what it means for you, and how it is either energy for your life, or in some cases it's really powerful to find out that it's in your way.
I so love that because I think that so many people don't really actually take the time to examine, like you mentioned,
Right.
what they believe. And so, or their belief systems, or the beliefs that are not serving them, as we might say, or
Yeah.
enhancing their life. And some people never go there. And then there are those, like, I think you, me, I like who sit there and say, this belief system totally doesn't work for me, like,
Yeah.
or this belief I had about myself is totally not true. You
Yeah, and it usually doesn't show up like I believe this. Usually it shows up what I know, you know. And whenever I hear somebody say, well, we know that, I become suspicious. I, what's coming next? I'm really like, my ears turn into Spock and get pointy at the top of them. And I go, all right, so what's coming next? What's going to be said here? And then I listen for it and I go, do we know that? Yeah.
And I think about beliefs that we have about ourselves, which all of a sudden, sometimes when you think about them and you think to yourself, like when you have this idea about yourself and you think to yourself, that's totally not logical. Like, when you think about it, like if you were to say that about somebody else who you didn't know, you would
Yeah.
say, how could you think that's true? You're like, it's not making sense, kind of thing, and you don't look at it like that. And then one day, I mean, I've had this experience where I looked at myself and thought to myself, that is totally stupid. Like, I mean, what you're saying to yourself makes no sense. It's totally stupid. And then you're like, oh, okay, I've had this misbelief for a long time.
Yes. Yeah, I had a guy that I had a lot of respect for way back when, a training that I went through, and his my favorite saying of his is, "The truth shall set you free, and first it will piss you off." You know? And the more violent your reaction to whatever got said and whatever it is that you now are open to taking a look at, or finally just kind of sheepishly realize, man, I didn't even realize that was, keeping me from fully enjoying my life. And holy mackerel, what a waste of time. And so there's all of that stuff that they can, and plus there could be a joy to it. Like, man, really? I didn't know that.
Well, I
That's
think
just
if you
opens
have
up all this cool stuff now.
I think if you have a belief that's not true about yourself, all of a sudden it feels liberating. It's like, "Oh, really, that's so not true." And then you feel like you've been set free. Like,
Yes.
literally, you were carrying baggage that you could put down and say, "Okay, well, that's one suitcase I no longer need to carry," you know?
Yeah, yeah, and the neat part of it is that it elicits a physical reaction that feels a little bit like being more youthful or having more energy or really having a lot more opportunity to enjoy life.
Absolutely. You know, it's amazing what the human mind can do, how we can form these opinions of ourselves or opinions of others,
Yes,
in that aspect and realize that they're totally not true. And if we look at other people, I was thinking about this in regard to somebody I met probably about 10 months ago.
yes,
And lovely person, but comes across as being um, a little bit maybe aloof and a little bit unapproachable. And I don't know, just kind of really and so I wasn't quite sure how I felt about her and everything. And as I've gotten to know her better, I really like her.
yes.
And and I really have a lot of respect for, her knowledge and what she does and everything. And so it's so interesting that a lot of like those immediate opinions or beliefs we have about, and I think in regard to other people, uh, you know, that we're sometimes too quick to judge.
And yeah, when that happens, it really is the mirror being held up on a belief that you and I have. And that belief is getting in the way of listening, and that listening is getting in the way of getting to understand and getting to know the person who you're in the conversation with, and getting hung up on their words, as opposed to what their feeling is, and being able to listen with all of your senses, as opposed to getting stuck, on the no, I don't think so, Tim. And while you're doing that, you're not listening to what they're doing, saying, and being, and you kind of get left out of the opportunity to upgrade until you get back and ask a question. Can you tell me more about that? Or what did you just say? Or yeah, let me write this down for a minute.
Exactly. Is like as I've been in conversations or been at meetings which she is a part of, as I listen to her, and it's really opening up my ears to really listen to her,
Yeah,
and so then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, she makes a lot of sense, or she really knows what she's talking about. And, and then all of a sudden the other stuff kind of falls away. It doesn't really become significant or it doesn't matter anymore.
right, right. There's kind of a neat element to this in terms of how we listen and how we engage, in conversation. If we've decided that we're going to use this as an opportunity to grow and learn and actually have a full experience. And another way of looking at it is you and I have uh, we have a tendency to be in conversations where we have the TV clicker going in front of us, like, okay, and we're voting, some on whether or not it's even worth listening to when that person is speaking, but I really wanna hear more from that person, you know what I mean? Like,
Oh,
apparently
yeah.
that and the neat part of it is that if you, or if I'll speak for me, when I train myself to decide to get value out of whatever anybody is saying, I may have a question and I may come out of my chair and challenge what somebody is saying. And the more you hang around with me, you know that I will have a quick reverse to totally take that back because I'm not about debating what they're saying. I want to understand what they're saying. You know what I mean? So that's a little bit different for most people in the conversations because they are trained that if they have a reaction to a conversation and it's not a good one, it typically means that somebody else is trying to convince them to change their mind. And what if empowerment comes from being able to hold the thought that you had before the conversation began, the one you didn't know you had that comes up and you get a reaction to it. I think the current word is called triggered, that
Right.
that something inside of you causes a reaction, and before there's any real opportunity to critically think about it or put any emphasis on understanding what it means, you have this kind of visceral reaction and immediately respond to it, and it's not usually your best thinking.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that happens is if you come into the conversation with, okay, not only what can I learn, but especially in the things that we're doing is how can I help the other person? Then sometimes those little triggers become insignificant. Like you kind of put them aside because you're
Yeah,
like, well, the focus isn't you and how you might quote unquote feel threatened or that might something. There's much more about getting beyond that. But when you talk about triggers, I'm listening to a lecture the other day, and the woman used this phrase, which just kept on annoying me.
yeah,
And it was my friend said it's a phrase they definitely don't use in the East Coast. Like it's like, and I could not. I don't think she used that phrase like I don't know how many times in this 20-minute lecture where I don't
yeah,
think I heard anything else she said. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm so glad I have the recording because now that I kind of laughed at myself for
yes,
saying, like, oh my gosh, I got hung up on that one phrase. So I can go back and listen to it and listen to the real content.
yeah.
But as she was saying it, I'm sitting there going, I wish she would just stop saying that because it's annoying me, like,
Well, I
uh,
think it's commendable, for anybody to not only listen to what's being said and have a reaction to it, but to listen to yourself listen, you know?
right.
Like, I totally missed the boat on that, and that's got nothing to do with the person speaking, that's all me, and I don't need to do anything to correct that right this minute, but let me get right back in there, and then, using that word, a trigger kinda implies that you don't have a choice. It's an automatic knee-jerk response that is not coming from consideration or even understanding. It's
Mhm.
just a friend of mine used to say that it's a little bit like wetting your finger and sticking it into a wall outlet. You don't have a choice, you know? It
Right.
kinda locks you in or locks you out?
Right. And I think that, when you can look at it and say, okay, that's me, that's my trigger, or that's something that rubs me the wrong way, and are willing to see that, then, and just be able to sit there and put it aside. Like, and that's the gift of recording, or whatever, or listening to a recording. You can sit there and say, okay, well, that's my reaction, and I can just, I'll put that aside and see what other information is there,
Yeah,
you
and
know.
and and there's also this really neat thing when there is a recording, is the opportunity to go and do some research. And let's check in on the language. Let's find out if there's a commonality of definition here, or maybe that is an East Coast phrase that if I were able to translate it into something that's meaningful to me, what would that look like? And
Hmm.
holy mackerel, was there some opportunity for us to build a bridge here and have a conversation that makes life better for people? I don't know.
Absolutely. And I think that, a certain percentage of like self-examination and looking at what your own triggers are in a non-recorded conversation, like so a live conversation with somebody
Yeah,
where you sit there and you're like, oh, okay, like it's almost like get a grip, like just like, okay, recheck, take a deep breath. Um, you know, what's your reaction? Okay, that's my reaction,
yeah,
you know, because like you said, because triggers like that electrical shock, it happens very quickly. And so once once it goes away or that immediate reaction is away, there is the opportunity usually to put it aside and say, okay, I'm
yeah.
going to look beyond. Like it's not like it lasts usually for, I mean, we make it last, but there is the ability to say, okay, that's my reaction. That's my stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and above and beyond that, Jan, is that there is this dynamic of first there's a trigger, then there's an automatic reaction, and then there's a consideration period, which is usually has to do with doubt and shame, and another something or other that's there, and then a consequence for it, which may be loss of relationship and relatedness, might be um, a continued feeling of not goodness, if you will. But there's
Mhm.
always this sort of dynamic where those 4 things are in place, and afterwards, there's rarely an opportunity to go back and address the root cause, as we love to say, of the trigger. In many cases, all it requires to upgrade your response to that situation is to just ask questions and become curious, not about what the person said, but your reaction to it.
Mhm.
And when you start to do this, and I know that this is part of psychological training for people, especially in the area of addiction, sports athletics, and training and that sort of thing, um, probably executive training for business, mostly where there's interpersonal relationships and react where you're going to deal with a diversity of experiences and people.
Mhm.
And if you're interested in being more facile with that and having more success with outcomes from conversation, it's really kind of a neat thing to go back and say, in every circumstance, how can I build more muscle in me to be able to A, understand my reaction, and B, make a difference with it, and C, maybe at some point in the future, not even have to react that way.
I think there's an element of, if you're doing it for like yourself, when you do that, of almost looking at it like, I'm curious about this.
Yeah.
Like, because I think being somebody who takes them, takes me in general, takes myself very seriously, sometimes it's really good to, like, if you look at it like that, like, oh, that was a really curious thing I did. It was a really curious reaction. It takes that intensity out of it a little bit. And almost like when you can look at yourself and actually almost laugh at it, and sit there and say, like, and when you do it again, it's almost like, oh, I did it again, like I had that same reaction again.
Yeah, so you and I are of a certain age. I'm certainly a lot older than you are. And we both remember the Saturday Night Live skits with Gilda Radner and Rosanna Dana, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Where she would sit there and she would hear something, and then she would go off and she would talk about this and that and the other thing, and then all of a sudden Aykroyd or whoever would say, I didn't say that. I said this. And she goes, "Oh, never mind." So, our trigger reaction in many cases isn't has nothing to do with what's being said by the other person. It has everything to do with how that resonates with us in the moment, and what we believe, but we don't know we believe. I just think this is such a great conversation because it neither validates nor invalidates believing. Like, we have to believe something.
Right.
Got to believe that the earth is solid beneath us as we take step forwards. We have to believe that if we eat enough calories during the course of the day, we get to get up and wake up and play again tomorrow.
Hmm.
So those are the things that keep us going through time and keep us alive. And then there are beliefs when you really adopt one that basically says, if I can be curious, I can grow and learn. I love that one. That's the one that made the biggest difference for me.
And I think the whole element, yeah, I think there is this element. I mean, I think if you lose curiosity or the desire for learning or information, then I think that's probably, I mean, to me, it's the downfall of cognitive ability because there's no stimulation, like your
Right.
brain, so therefore you go into cognitive decline because there's a lack of curiosity and desire, like, which if you look at kids and their inquisitiveness from the time, like their exploration, you know, and that doesn't need to end no matter how old you are, that idea of exploration.
Yeah, and when I said earlier about, having that response that makes you feel more youthful, I actually think that that's where it places you in that curiosity zone, and it's now okay not to know everything for a minute.
Right.
It
Well, I
really
think
does.
sorry, because I think about aging and I think about if you look at like the studies where like older people go in or kids go in and older people are there to teach them something.
Right.
How, being around kids and their ability to explore and be curious and to remind you
Yes.
what it's like to be curious and explore, and the fact that you may not know everything is not a
Yeah.
bad thing. It's not negative.
Yeah. I'm in a city that I haven't been in for 2.5 years in Denver. And I'm having physical reactions to several different things. My sinuses are totally struggling.
Mhm.
Uh, if I don't drink enough water and take ibuprofen, then I start getting these headaches, and then start getting dehydrated and all the rest of that. And then uh, just let's pretend like I told you the whole litany, okay? Now the neat part of it is then I get to be around my 9 and 10-year-old grandsons, and they are absolutely uh, fresh. They're unpredictable in many circumstances, and yet we still have these little nonverbal things that we can do. I can bust them up in a second just by looking at them in a particular way, and it challenges me with them. I do want to impart some of my age and wisdom to them, but I also understand that my wisdom is useful to me. My words may not be useful to them. So rather than telling them or telling them a story, I like to ask a question and then kind of tease answers out of them.
Mm.
Watch their minds work. So in one case, like for instance, the younger one is 9 years old. His name is Lincoln. And he's more up for this game than Jack is, to be perfectly honest with you. Jack's the 10-year-old, and Jack knows everything. And Lincoln is more subtle, and he's more interested in the people part of it, the interaction, the relationship. We have this little game that we play with each other, and he taught me when he came out to my house last summer. But we'll be kind of not looking at each other, and all of a sudden just say "love you," and then the other one goes "love you." So the point that I'm making is that although I would be thrown to tell them things and expect for that to make a difference, I actually know with some certainty that they're actually not listening. So if there's a difference that I want to make, I have found it's better to ask a question and wait for the response and then to engage the response. Tell me more about that. And what does that mean to you? Just those sorts of things that I'm not giving them an answer, but I'm allowing them to explore the question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I love that. And then the other way I think that it's really, I think valuable, like the word valuable, to impart wisdom is by your actions.
Yes.
So really the way they see us, you, me, interact with other people and interact with everything. So the earth, you know, the, you know, people learn by example.
Yes.
And so I feel like that is a huge way where you don't really need to say anything. You're
Yeah.
just who you are, and that's the way they learn.
Yeah.
And I was listening to someone who was talking about her grandson or whatever, and she was talking about I don't know, she must be our age, maybe a little older, and her grandson had to write a report about, like, the person he considered, like, his hero or whatever, so he chose her, and she thought he chose her because she's done all these different things with her life, and he said it was because when she told him a story at one point that when she was in school, there was a boy who they picked on for wearing glasses, and she didn't pick on him, and that is why he chose her, because she kind of stood up for the underdog,
Yeah.
and she was, like, floored because she said it was really like, she didn't even really remember telling him the story, but it was kind of like that was what made him that was like, he considered that obviously really important, like, or just monumental, and
Yeah.
so that's a story, but still we do impart a lot of information and wisdom and, you know, an influence over things we actually, quote, unquote, "live."
Yes. Yeah. So though that happens in getting an experience of being successful at doing what you just said is about 5% of the time. The rest of it is like trying to get a squirrel to do something.
Yeah, true.
They are so animated and they have their own language that involves their entire body and they're constantly giggling and wrestling and they're just so awesome together.
Mhm.
And so sometimes it's hard to get an experience in edgewise, if you will. But you know, they uh, they inspire me by how they are with each other and how they are with us. And it's just rarefied air, not because of the altitude here, even though we're 5,000 feet above sea level. It's rarefied air to be around them and to observe them, and then to also, from time to time, see where my interaction with them is coming from me, that's not about them, that I need to take a look at and pull it back.
Right, but also the fact that they're different, like you talked about, and I think that that's, when if you look at individuals and realize, you can have that whole game of like or the whole tweaking out of information or imparting knowledge by way of questions with Lincoln, where you can't have it with Jack. And realizing that, certain aspects of who we are, like almost we have to switch to interact with different people.
That's perfect. While you were saying that, I was thinking to myself, yes, it's a different language and communication technology with the two of them. They just don't respond the same way to the same things, and thank God for that. So the needle.
Absolutely.
So I would say to you, in my experience, may or not be true, but the language that gets developed between people and animals they've been around for a while, especially years or dozens of years or 15 or 20 years, get to the point where neither, like the person or the dog or the cat need to say anything at all. It's almost like an old married couple, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I think that there is something to voice, I
Yep.
mean, there is a connection, and I always say because, like, if I'm on screen and, somebody has a dog and I change the tone of my voice, Tonka comes running as like, "Okay, who you talking to that you have that tone with? That's not me." You know? You know? And you
Yeah.
get the same tone when you talk to a baby, there's a real lightness and like joy to it. And he's like, okay, like you're talking to somebody and but there's there's an energetic language which happens, which sometimes we're not even aware of. Like the other day, we have our routine and all of a sudden he got up and usually he's in bed when I get up and kind of when he's ready to get fed, he kind of comes out because he knows food's involved. And he came out like so much earlier and just started to like cuddle me and to lean against me. And I'm just like, and you're kind of like, and then I sit there and I say, okay, what's energetically going on? Like, what is he feeling? What is I'm feeling? Because obviously there's a language that's happening, a communication that's happening on some sort of energetic level
Yeah.
that sometimes we're not, and then it's always fun for me to sit there and say, "Oh, okay, like what is this really about?" Like what or I mean to enjoy it obviously and not but just try to just sit with it and say, "Okay, this is what's happening." But there is a communication that happens.
Absolutely. And there's another kind of a neat thing too, is that, um, I had a friend at one point who told me that kids and dogs hate him. And I said, "Why do you think that is?" And he said, "I don't know." I said, "Can I take a stab at it?" Hmm. He said, "Sure, give me your best shot and see if I'm still standing, Bill," you know? So I said, "Well, what if they're gonna let you know that you're being phony with them where adults won't?
Mhm.
And how are they gonna do it? They're not gonna pay attention to you. They're gonna withdraw from you. They're gonna pull back. And when you shift your attention from trying to be clever for them and putting on a demonstration or a show, if you just get interested in them and who they are and what they're doing, now suddenly you're very interesting." And I said, "I can't tell you how to do that." I said, "But I invite you to take a look." And he said, "Well, you're a real butthead, but thank you very much."
Mhm.
And I saw him again about a week and a half later, and he said, "You know, I had a breakthrough with my sister's, in-law's, 2-year-old. And when we got together, instead of trying to make faces standing up, I got down on the floor, down to her level visually, and got my face right up next to hers and let her pull on my mustache. And boy, did she start giggling.
Mhm.
And now for some reason, every time I walk into the room, she just lights up like like a Christmas tree.
Mhm.
And I said, "Well, what did you learn out of that?" He said, "It had nothing to do with my trying to be cute for her, the way adults try to be cute for kids. It had everything to do with what you said, getting interested into who they are and genuinely, getting into their world, you know?"
Yeah,
So,
there's something of true value of getting down on their level. Like I
oh, yeah.
and I think that that works on so many like that's also like if you just look at it as part of a physical thing that we're big and we're high up and they're not looking at us most of the time. Like, when you get down on their level, whether it be an animal or a child, you're on eye level with them. And
Yes.
there's something that's truly unifying and I think a lot less threatening if something's actually on your level. And I'm not saying get in somebody's face, like especially if
Yeah.
it's a dog, but being down. And I remember one of the first vets I used for my dog. I loved him because he just automatically got on the floor with him. It
Yeah.
was like he wasn't standing up and talking to me. It was kind of like, well, I'm going to be here with the dog. And if you want to come down on my, like, with the two of us, you can get on the floor and we can look eye to eye too. But it was much more about his relationship with Tonka versus, you know, okay, we're going to talk about your child right now, your fur child or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really seems to me, Jan, like in both of those circumstances, I think I've just always had a lot of fun. I've been around a lot of babies because when we first had ours, my wife Jan stayed home, and we had a little daycare deal going, and we were taking care of nieces and nephews and other people. And what I really found was that it had nothing to do with trying to be cute or clever or anything like that. It more or less had to do with staying with it, you know, until the response was derived first from them to me to them, and then back again, you know. And that stayed with me in terms of how I interact with adults because I have a feeling that it's not that different really in terms of the presence and the personality. Um, it needs to be authentic, and it just needs to be coming from a place of caring as opposed to a performance, if you will.
Yeah, I think caring, that from caring comes, if we talk about connection, being able to connect with someone, and less a little bit about, I have to say this, is less about what can I gain from this, much more like connecting for the sake of connection, for the sake of listening, and a lot less about, what's in this, thinking about society or just whatever, what's in this for me.
Yeah,
And
the word play comes to mind, Jan. You
mhm.
know, when you play with other people and you play with animals and you play with children, I think they get it, you know?
Yeah, and I think I do love that word curious. So we're in the C's, connection, communication,
Oh, yeah.
curiosity. And I remember taking a flight with my nephew. He is probably about 11 and he had never flown before. And I flew with him down to see my folks in Florida.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting on the plane, and since he had never been on a plane, he asked me 1,000 questions, like like stuff he looked at that I had like, not that I, but that I had never even like I didn't even notice anymore, or I never had thought about. And
Yeah.
looking, it was such a learning experience for me because I sat there and kind of looked at it from his eyes. Like, oh, from him, not his eyes, but what he was seeing and experiencing. Like, so from him, and I almost think I carried that with me and never realized I carried it with me when I would go to different places myself. And all of a sudden, I would become much more aware of the experience per se, like whether that be in nature or going somewhere that I had never been. And I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? Or, so being able to develop curiosity about different experiences in life, and that might be obviously experiences with other people. Like, can I be curious about this?
I love what you're saying, and, uh, for me, it kinda has something to do with familiarity, you know? Again, back to the, "I know something about you," or, "I know something about this." And so, in a room full of thousands of data points and different things that can be focused on and seen, you know, all around us, most of us sleepwalk through those situations, and we miss the detail, and we miss the opportunity, you know, to see the magic in the moment. And when, you know, the first time that you make a decision, or when I make a decision, you know, to see the magic in the moment, I've never heard anybody say that before, but I'm saying to you, there is magic in a moment. And with that, it's worth spending the time to look around a little bit and see the detail and notice what's different, as opposed to, you know, walking into the situation. This is I'm familiar with it. I know about it. I'm on to something else beyond this, and missing, you know, missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, and then I think especially if you start to go into a situation which is familiar and you've had the same experience, like, or your same take on this situation. If you
Yeah.
can look at it as being curious and being able to see different points about it, then you change perspective on the situation. So it's never the same, you know,
Right.
because, you know, you go in and you're different. If it's involved with other people, they're different. I mean, no one's the same from moment to moment. We all change, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah. The perspective from the things in the room to the people in front of you. Like, for instance, I'm meeting with relatives and friends that I've known for, in some cases, 30 to 50 to my whole life, right? Years. And there's a propensity to act like they're the same people they were the last time I saw them 2.5 or 3 years ago before COVID. And there's also this really kind of neat opportunity to find out who they are now. Like, what's up with you? What have you been through? What's going on? How do you feel? What do you like these days? You know? Again, the investigative side, getting out the Inspector Clouseau hat and
and getting on the kids theme, which might be outdated by now, but where's Waldo?
yeah,
you know.
yeah. Where in the world is Carmen San Diego, right?
Right,
No,
exactly.
yeah, it's there's several different quotes that come to mind, and one of them is, it's not what you know that holds you back. It's what you know and are completely sure of that's wrong.
Mm.
I think that's a really wonderful, simple statement to invite people to consider in every moment. There's more data here. And the minute you think that you know what's going on, it's not that. There's more data here.
Well, I mean, coming from my background in science, I mean, we're always learning new things. Like things become revealed, especially let's say with technology, which you
Right.
didn't know before. So things you believe to be true all of a sudden are different because now you have different data coming in and you're like, "Oh, okay, what I thought was true was this, but that's not necessarily so, or that isn't so because now I have this information coming in." And
Yeah.
now everything has changed. And if we could take that almost that aspect, not being so literal, of going into a situation with different people or knowing that what we knew was wrong, then we're sitting, then we have a new way to look at things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other neat thing too is that typically, if we go through a conversation with somebody and it's a transactional conversation, like going out to lunch, ordering something from a server, getting it delivered to you, focusing your attention on the people that are at the table with you, finishing the meal, asking for the check, saying some kind of nice thing to the server, leaving them the tip, getting up and walking away. I see that as opportunity lost, you know? And the neat part of um, that ability to take a moment, and each time you go into a new space, and I'm known for this, and not necessarily in a complimentary way. Because last evening we went out to dinner, my cousin and his wife and my wife, and I immediately started asking questions of the server, you know, and so my cousin's wife said, "Okay, here we go." And she looks around the table and she says, "By the time this meal is over, Bill's going to know the names of all the people in her family, where she went to school, how old she is, what she wants to be when she grows up." And so it's kind of a laugh. But I don't care. I would
Mm.
rather be known for that than some old nasty curmudgeon that just goes through life not smelling the flowers, right?
Well, I love the fact that you think about people as flowers because I don't think that many people do.
Yeah,
You know, I feel like people don't look at each person as being, I don't know, unique, different, special.
yeah,
Uh,
all
uh,
those things.
all those things, and then all of a sudden they kind of lump a whole group of people together. They make prejudgments, and if you were to, even if you don't have a conversation with them, if you were to
Right,
just treat them as if, like, okay, that's not my style to go in and have an interchange with someone, but can I
right.
look at this person as being unique, individual, and special, no matter whether there's like with an animal, like whether you're having verbal communication or not, because there is an energetic thing that happens that shifts.
Yeah,
You're looking at each person as having value, you
yeah,
know, and that's the gift of having like those interchanges because you're getting to know someone and that's valuable, really valuable. But maybe you don't have a conversation with them, but you look at them as having value anyway. Like, I don't need to know all the nitty gritty details. I just
right.
know that somewhere in your life there you have a family and you have children or whatever, or fur children, and you have good things that have happened to you and you have bad things that have happened to you. And you're just a value no matter what and
Yeah,
what we exchange on a verbal way.
yeah, and Jan, I really do. I regard life as a laboratory, and the reason that I put it that way is because I'm kind of curious by nature, and I've trained myself to be this way. Anybody that listens to all of our podcasts are going to know that I'm not just saying that for the sake of saying it. And at the same time, my curiosity has stepped over out of this podcast into another podcast that you and I have already worked on called the 100 Person Project. So I'm definitely drawn to people who are, dogs, children, people who want to play. If you want to play, I want more of you, I want you in my life, right?
Mhm.
And so about, I don't know, I didn't need to ask a lot more questions of this young lady, but I immediately said, "Look, I've got a new thing I'm doing called the 100 Person Project, and I would love to interview you." We basically ask 13 questions, and I'm a half a dozen people into this right now, and she goes, "I am in. How do I get to play, And she was absolutely a remarkable human being. And so I owe her an invite email after you and I are done here. And she's in Colorado, and I will get something going with her and get her. And she will be, I think, either number 7 or number 8 in my 100 person project.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is all about play. And I'm so much attuned with the energy aspect, and you brought that up with the animals or whatever, is that sort
Yeah.
of nonverbal communication that people have, like the verbal, but
Yes.
also the nonverbal, like, communication that
Sure.
or exchange that we have. And we can think about that aspect of communication is not necessarily obviously limited by people. I
Right.
mean, we communicate with nature, with, you know, the earth, our surroundings, you know, especially like the earth and nature. And then we definitely can connect. And maybe, you're not physically going up and hugging a tree, even though I have been known to hug a tree. So, but
Does it bother you if somebody calls you a tree hugger?
no, it doesn't.
Well,
But I have,
yeah,
and then and you don't necessarily need to do that, but there is like you know, definitely a profound impact of being in nature and
yeah.
being surrounded by that energy and feeling that connection. And nature's communicating all the time. So,
It is, it is, and the other thing that we were more or less talking around, is that I don't know where and when exactly I picked this up, but I made a decision about 25 years ago, 30 years ago, that I'm for people. And I really, 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 and the whole reason we're doing both of these podcasts, but this one we're talking to you out there, the listener, and we'll never have an opportunity to interview you unless you contact me and say, "Hey, I want to be part of your 100-person project," or I'd like to be a voice on and face on your Lighting the Candle podcast. And I think everybody in the world is in a different place at any given time, and not everyone is ready to play right then. So
Mhm.
they become projects for me. They become, how can I twist myself out of shape to get into their world so that they know that I'm not looking to them as, they're providing me a service, or we're standing in line together, or we just happen to be riding an elevator and the best thing for us to do is to not look at the other person. It's every single moment is this kind of, for me, especially when I remember, is this delicious opportunity to engage another human being and add one more aspect, to the experience and memories and all those sorts of things. And it's very remarkable and moving to think about the wonderful people that I have come into contact with one time in my life. And in less than 20 or 30 seconds, it made a difference for the whole rest of the day or for the whole rest of the week. So that experience on my part, this is me coming back to what I believe because of my learning and my experience, and then my knowledge, and then all the rest of that, is that I don't think there's any groups. I really don't. I think we're banded together by a common language, and there's this propensity to want to act like we know something about the person before we've asked them questions.
Mhm.
So it's that curiosity. And I have my thumb on the scale with this 100-person project, that I really do believe that I'm going to learn more about how the same questions asked of 100 different people could possibly yield a whole lot of uniqueness in terms of what they bring in their life's experience, what they know, and what's important to them.
And I just have to say uniqueness, but I think what's interesting is also the commonalities.
Yeah.
So that's where it becomes special to me. Is yes, each person is unique, but there is this feeling of like, oh, among all these 100 people or 1,000 people,
Yes.
look, we all share this. And to me, that's the gift because you're not losing anybody's uniqueness. Like you're not telling anybody that they're not unique, but you're also revealing that we have a lot more in common with others than we might think.
Yeah. And what if we do?
Oh, wow. Then to me, you know, that's when the world changes because then, you maintain both your, and your, with what you're doing and what we all talk about here is then you're honoring the individual, but you're recognizing the group as a whole
Yeah,
and
there's
that we're all connected.
yeah, I'm almost, while you're speaking, thinking in terms of the shepherd, how the shepherd will leave the flock and the dog stays with the flock, but the shepherd goes and looks for the one sheep or lamb that's wandered off. And there are so many times that we get in a brief conversation with somebody and we make a decision, they're not interested in me, I'm not interested in them, let's move on, you know? And in many cases, um, and they're getting that response, and we're giving that response to other people, and that becomes a way of being.
Mhm.
And what if we all, just for a moment, decided that empowerment is a team sport, you know? We can do it for ourselves, we can do it for other people can do it for us, you know? And if you just remember that this world works better, when your head is up and looking forward as opposed to looking down and feeling bad about something or whatever it is. Maybe there's a time to feel bad and a time to feel good, but there's also a time to really, really appreciate and the wonder of what other beings can bring into our life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, any sort of wrap up thoughts or?
No, I think we're pretty good. Mhm.
I'm feeling pretty good. I hope you at home are too. I know you are. I get it. I feel it right now. So, with that said, we're going to wrap up our 101st lighting the candle. And I want you to know that there's an inside joke here because Jan and I have basically, for the last hour, and I'll leave this for another episode to talk about, but for the last hour, we've been doing exactly what we've been talking about during the hour, and that is to take an instance where things don't work and not only, you know, give them a place to work, but really have a ball doing it. So, with that said, I love you and I hope that your life is going the way that you want. And if it isn't, go talk to somebody and get curious about what's open and available to you. So, thank you so much and keep listening to us. Just about anywhere podcasts are available, we are there. So, bye for now, and we will look forward to seeing you next week. So long.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.